all the discussion about the vaccine, people have thought, oh, good, the vaccine is going to come and it's all going to be fine. We'll all get vaccinated and then that'll be the end of that. The reality is that this pathogen is here forever. It isn't going anywhere. There's so much disease out there. We'll never be able, even if it completely sterilizes populations, very unlikely we'll eliminate this disease. Look how much trouble they've had in eliminating, for example, polio. That eradication program's been going on for 15 years and they're still not there. So this is going to come and go, and we're going to get winters where we get a lot of this virus back in action. The vaccine is unlikely to have a durable effect that'll last for a very long time. So we're going to have a continual cycle of vaccinations and then more disease and more vaccinations and more disease. So I think the idea that we're going to eliminate it across the population that's just not realistic. This is it. It's like the first time we had a big flu epidemic, which was a very long time ago. This is essentially the sentinel example of that. And this will be with the human race for a very long time.
Let's talk a little more about that with the science writer Laurie Garrett. And Laurie won a Pulitzer Prize for her coverage of the Ebola epidemic in 1995 and is author of the book, The Coming Plague. Hello, Laurie. Well, what should we make of that, and what John Bell is telling us he thinks life is going to be like, I don't know, 2, 3, 4, 10 years' time?
Well, I think Sir John is spot on. I was predicting back in February that in a best case scenario, in which we in fact had an effective vaccine, we would still be facing dire lockdowns and catastrophic issues with our economy and so on related to this virus for at least 36 months. And that was my most optimistic. And I also warned back then that if we didn't take proper action in February, March, April, the virus would have the advantage and would become endemic in one country after another, meaning, as Sir John Bell was saying, it would always be there and we would always be exposed and re-exposed. And I think there's two really fundamental problems with this flurry of vaccine reports. It's not just the Oxford vaccine. There's several that have now put out their first preliminary data in human trials. And there's two big problems with all of them. The first is they're all using different methods to measure how effective their vaccines are. So you can't compare one to another. It's like trying to compare apples and oranges. And the second problem is that none of them have vaccinated anybody for more than a few weeks. So we have no idea how long any of this immunity will last.
Right. So there's a lot to pick apart here. But number one, if we were going to be in a world where you needed a vaccine every 6 weeks in order to live an ordinary life, wouldn't we just set up a world where we're all having a vaccine every 6 weeks? I mean, compared to the 20% hit to GDP that we've suffered, that would seem like a relatively good value project, wouldn't it?
Well, you're leaping ahead to the assumption that we would have such a thing and that that would be possible and that the virus wouldn't mutate to get around the vaccine, that it wouldn't have created a massive selection pressure promoting viral evolution and so on and so forth. I mean, there's so many things there in the unknown. I think the real answer is we're never going to go back to 2019 again. The economy is not going back to 2019, and the way we all live on this planet is not going back to 2019.
So when you say we're not going back, do you mean even in 10 years we're not going back?
We're going to a new normal, and we don't know yet what that's going to be. I think people have had a failure of collective imagination, whether it's Fleet Street, Wall Street, whatever street. The think is still much too narrow and short term.
But so is your essential proposition that, look, forget 36 months, which you mentioned as a best case. This really could be more or less indefinite, certainly for the scope of the rest of the lives of many of our listeners. And are you saying, I mean, let's just be clear, are we saying we won't go to the theatre in that time, or we'll just have to go to a theatre that is very sparsely populated, or we'll have to let the virus let rip through the population eventually because, at some point we'll all get it?
Look, we can't fundamentally answer the question you posed because we don't have any product out there that claims to offer the kind of immunity that would allow you to go to the theater. We hope someday that will happen. And I think one really big problem right now we all collectively face is that there's tremendous sort of Wall Street type enthusiasm about these initial vaccines coming out down the pike. But the ones more likely to produce really lasting immunity are much further back in the pipeline. And we won't see them coming forward with human trials for probably another year. So we may very well go to a kind of euphoria about a mediocre or what might even turn out to be pretty lousy vaccine. But that doesn't mean there might not be a year, 2 years down the road, a more reasonable product.
Right.
Nevertheless, we can't go back to living exactly the way we did. That's not going to happen anytime in the next 3, 4, 5 years, perhaps ever again. And I think the same goes with how you look at climate change. And the world is slowly adjusting to that. You can't just blithely imagine that you can endlessly purchase fossil fuel burning vehicles. The world has to change.
Laurie, Garrett, that is the start of a conversation. I think not the end of it, because there's so much to take on board in that. But much appreciate your candor, Laurie, Garrett. Thank you very much.